You weren't oblivious. You were observing. You didn't miss the signs. You were the sign. Now that you've stopped playing dumb, the truth is hitting them like a scream in a soundproof room, loud, echoing, and inescapable. They thought you didn't know, believed they were playing chess with someone still learning the rules, but while they were scheming in circles, you were tracking every move in silence. Now, the mask is off. Now, the bluff is done. The same people who rolled their eyes when you stayed quiet are now sweating in their own lies, praying the truth doesn't show up with your face on it. The unveiling. They didn't break you. They embarrassed themselves thinking you were blind while you were just blinking slow. Chosen ones don't react fast because we move in universal timing. You weren't behind. You were ahead, letting the clowns reveal themselves without interruption. You were playing chess with your energy while they were juggling egos. You didn't speak up because they didn't deserve the warning. Now they're watching the fallout from a storm they didn't realize was waiting behind your silence. They thought your ignorance was real, but it was theater. You gave them just enough rope, not because you were naive, but because you understood that some masks only fall when the room thinks no one's watching. And they performed. Oh, they performed. They lied, manipulated, plotted, and smirked, all while thinking they had the upper hand. But what they didn't know, the moment you stopped correcting them, you started collecting karma. The haunting reality. Here's the part that haunts them. They can't undo what they did when they thought you were blind. They can't unsay the things they said when they believed you weren't paying attention. They can't rebuild the fake image they crafted when they assumed you'd never rise, because you did rise, quietly, precisely. Now your very existence is judgment. Your glow is justice. Your calm is consequence. The power of being chosen doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with echoes. You don't just survive betrayal. You outlive it so gracefully it makes your enemies question their whole existence. You don't chase validation. You become the vibration that bends reality. You're not just a person. You're proof. You're the reminder that the universe protects its own, even when it looks like it's gone quiet. Now they're learning. You weren't the fool. You were the fuse. The silence is over. Now that your clarity is showing, so is their collapse. 1. They thought you were clueless. You were calculating. They thought you were clueless, but really, you were giving them space to hang themselves with their own delusion. You weren't confused. You were collecting evidence. You weren't late. You were letting their arrogance write its own eulogy. They thought you didn't see it. They believed they were slick, calculated ahead. They mistook your calm for confusion, your nods for ignorance, your quiet for weakness. They thought you were a background character in a game they already won. But what they never expected was that you were watching the entire show from the front row, writing the script for their downfall in silence. That's what terrifies them now, that you knew that you always knew. Every fake compliment, every side glance, every room where your name got twisted like a joke. You sat there, calm, still, almost too still, because you weren't lost. You were calculating. You were adding up every move, every manipulation, every alliance they built on the assumption that you were too dumb to see it. What they didn't know was that chosen ones don't expose the game. We let the game finish itself. They mistook the calm of the ocean for safety. Now they're trapped in the undertow. You weren't clueless. You were dangerous in disguise. You gave them the illusion of power because you understood something they never will. Alignment doesn't rush. The universe doesn't panic. The storm doesn't announce itself. It waits for the sky to go silent. And you were the storm dressed like fog. You let them walk into you thinking it was safe, thinking they'd won. But now they're choking on the very silence they once laughed at. 2. They laughed at the one watching. Now they're begging the one awakening. They danced in your silence like it was a grave. Now they realize it was a cocoon. They thought it was over for you when you went quiet, when you stepped back, when you withdrew your energy from rooms that thrived on mocking your presence and feeding off your discomfort. They thought you were finished. They assumed your silence was surrender, that your distance was collapse, that your peace was defeat. But the truth was far more dangerous than anything they prepared for. You were watching, not wallowing. Observing, not breaking. Transforming, not folding. You saw it all. You clocked every fake smile, every whispered word, every alliance built behind your back. You didn't react. You recorded. You didn't explode. You evolved. And that's what's killing them now, because the one they tried to bury isn't gone. You're awake now. And worse, you were awake the whole time. You were just waiting for the perfect moment to shed the false version of yourself they thought they had figured out. The chosen one never announces the shift. You don't warn them when the transformation is complete. You arrive, and when you do, everything they laughed at becomes the proof of what they never saw coming. They never prepared for your awakening. They were betting on your breakdown. They expected you to self-destruct. That was the plan, wasn't it? Keep pushing your buttons. Keep poking the wound. Keep playing their roles while praying that the pain would crack you wide open, that you'd lash out, look crazy, confirm their story, and hand them the narrative they needed to keep lying in peace. But instead of cracking, you cocooned. Instead of combusting, you concentrated. Now they're staring at the fire they lit, wondering why it didn't burn you, and realizing it just forged you. That's the power of being chosen. You don't get consumed by the chaos. You convert it. You didn't just sit there in silence. You grew teeth in that silence. You built armor. You learned who was real, who was fragile, who needed your light, and who just wanted to steal it. You saw them clearly, even while they celebrated your so-called absence. What they don't realize is that the one watching is always the one holding the power. The one who waits is the one who commands the storm when the moment arrives. And now you're not asking for their approval. You're watching them unravel from a higher place they can't reach. 3. They misread your peace as permission. Now their panic is personal. You let them feel safe in the lie. Now they can't survive your truth. They thought your peace meant approval. They assumed your calm was consent. They looked at your silence and mistook it for surrender, as if you were too afraid to speak or too small to matter. But the truth is, your peace wasn't surrender. It was permission denied. You weren't backing down. You were backing off so they could expose themselves without interference. 4. You played powerless, so they dropped their guard. You didn't have to raise your voice. You just had to stop playing small. They never saw you coming, not because you were invisible, but because you made yourself invisible. You dimmed the light. You pulled your energy back. You let them believe you had no idea what was happening, that you were unaware, soft, lost. But what they didn't know, you were playing powerless. And the moment they believed it, they dropped their guard. That's when their house of cards started falling. There's a difference between being weak and being strategic. You weren't being walked on. You were walking through. You didn't cower out of fear. You crouched for leverage. While they were chest out, head high, drunk on their own manipulation, you were crouched down low, gathering everything you needed to rise with precision. They exposed themselves, and you barely had to lift a finger. That's what makes your silence so lethal now. It wasn't just that you kept your mouth shut. It's why you did. You weren't intimidated. You weren't confused. You were watching, testing, letting them reveal themselves fully so, when it all came crashing down, there'd be no confusion about what was real and what was performative. You played the fool until the act gave you everything you needed to prove they were the ones bluffing the whole time. Their entire strategy relied on one assumption: that you were unaware. They thought if they whispered enough lies, if they pulled enough strings behind the scenes, if they smiled while planting knives in your back, you'd never catch on. Or worse, you'd collapse under the weight of what they built against you. But what they never imagined was that the person they were underestimating was more dangerous in silence than they could ever be in slander. You weren't scared. You were patient. That's what they couldn't predict. That kind of patience isn't normal to them. They're reactive, ego-driven, loud when they feel threatened. So they assumed your quiet was fear. They assumed your pause was panic. But for the chosen, stillness is strategy. 5. Now that you've stopped pretending, their reality is collapsing. They leaned on your silence like a crutch. Now they're limping through karma. Everything they built depended on you not waking up. Not because they truly had power, but because their illusion of power only existed while you stayed small. As long as you kept pretending not to see, not to feel, not to know, their world remained stable. Their fake stories held up. Their little games made sense. But now that you've stopped pretending, now that you've reclaimed your truth, their entire reality is falling apart piece by piece. Not because you destroyed it, Zrenia, but because you stopped holding it together. You were the balance. Without you, the system turned on them. It's wild how quickly they crumble when the energy they fed off decides to pull back. They called you emotional. They called you dramatic. They laughed at your intuition, dismissed your silence, and counted on you continuing to absorb their chaos like a sponge. But now the sponge is dry. Now the game is over. And the system they thought they controlled, it's collapsing under its own weight because the only thing holding it up was your restraint. You weren't a background player. You were the glue. You were the unspoken order. You were the one who kept the energy stable, the one who took the hits so the whole structure didn't cave. And the moment you stopped pretending not to notice, the moment you stepped into your awareness and chose not to carry it anymore, everything they built on your back started to fall. Now they're scrambling, pretending the collapse is coming from somewhere else. But deep down, they know. They know the shift is you. They leaned on your silence like a crutch. Your stillness gave them space to lie, manipulate, and hold on to positions they didn't earn. You played dumb, and they felt brilliant. You played calm, and they mistook it for weakness. But all along, your restraint was a safety net. You were the protection they didn't even deserve. And now that protection is gone, what's left is the truth they never thought would come for them. Now their peace is chaos. Now their power is cracking. Now their influence is leaking, because it wasn't real. It was never real. It was borrowed from the very one they tried to diminish. And that's what makes your awakening so devastating. You didn't return loud. You returned certain. You didn't storm in fists raised. You walked in with presence, with clarity, with that glow that doesn't need to prove anything. It already knows. And that knowing, that's what's wrecking them. You became the thing they feared most, fully aware, fully grounded, and fully uninterested in playing the game. 6. Chosen one, stop apologizing for the light that scares them. Your glow isn't too much. It's a mirror, and they hate what they see in it. Chosen one, let's stop playing games with the truth. You've been apologizing for how you were designed, not because you didn't feel the power in you, but because they couldn't handle it. Somewhere along the way, their discomfort became your burden. Their insecurity became your problem. Their silence made you second-guess your clarity. But enough is enough. Stop apologizing for being exactly who you were built to be. They were never afraid of your attitude. They weren't scared of your emotion. They weren't scared of your anger. They were scared of your awakening. Because the moment you realized your light wasn't a flaw, it was evidence. Their games ended. The power imbalance collapsed. The masks melted. You weren't confused. You were just surrounded by people who benefited from you staying unsure. And instead of trusting your intuition, you gaslit yourself. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I really am the problem. No, that wasn't humility. That was internalized sabotage. You tried to dim the very light that was exposing what others were desperate to keep hidden. You were never too much. You were too real. And realness is a threat in a world addicted to performance. Your presence is a test, and they failed it. You walked into rooms and shifted the atmosphere without saying a word. People flinched when you spoke, not because you were cruel, but because you were clear. Your discernment wasn't annoying, it was accurate. And they couldn't manipulate a person who wasn't playing the game. So what did they do? They labeled you, called you dramatic, difficult, intense, too deep, too sensitive, always reading into things. But that's the pattern. When people don't want to be seen, they blame the one who sees them. If any part of this message resonated with your spirit, I humbly ask you to consider a small gesture. Please gently tap that like button. It truly helps this quiet truth find its way to more hearts that might need to hear it. And if you've ever found strength in strategic silence, knowing your quiet was a powerful choice, perhaps you might join this channel as well. By joining, you'll be part of a community that understands the profound power of quiet wisdom. Thank you for simply being here and for your willingness to listen.